Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to those of you who decamped for the summer, and it's always wonderful to see those of you who are with us all summer as well. I have a question for you. How many of you, like me, had great aspirations to read several books over the summer? And how many of you, like me, have most of them still unopened on your nightstand? How many of you, like me, planned to do lots of hiking this summer? And how many of you, like me, only got a couple of hikes in under your belt? How many of you, like me, had hoped to have your high holiday sermons written by now? And how many of you, like me, still have a blank page? Well, that might be more of an insider struggle. I suspect many of you, like me, had other goals for the summer that also didn't come to fruition. The issue of unfinished business is one that shows up in this week's Torah portion, Shoftim, as well, but in a very different context. It has to do with the rules of warfare that Moses reviews with the Israelites for when they take the field against their enemies and they enter the Promised Land. Among his many instructions, the military commanders are to say the following to their troops. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not yet dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another dedicate it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has never harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid a bride price for a wife but has not yet married her? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another marry her. In other words, the officials are to send home anyone whose death in battle would be especially unfortunate given his life stage. These deferments or exemptions were designed to permit a young conscript to complete the establishment of his home, his agricultural livelihood, and his family, all of which were anchors of society. With the recent and utterly devastating news of the hostages who were brutally killed in the prime of their lives before they could return home, I suspect that many of my rabbinic colleagues might be using these verses to speak about the fate of those hostages, the other hostages still being held in captivity, and the ongoing sacrifices of our young and brave IDF soldiers who continue to risk their lives for the protection of Israel. And just to show you what good rabbinic colleagues Rabbi Zuckerman and I are, Rabbi Zuckerman used these same verses last night to tell another drosh, a beautiful drosh that I highly recommend you listen to when you listen to last night's service. What I want to do today, however, is something different. I want to examine these verses on a more spiritual level, one that connects to the season in which we find ourselves. The traditional commentators suggest that the reason for sending home the young conscript is that leaving those things incomplete, he would be highly distracted, that anyone in that state of mind would be little use in the army. He'd be unable to focus on the task at hand. He might even present a risk to his fellow soldiers. They worry that his anxiety about his unfinished business might prove infectious to the other soldiers as well. There's a Hebrew term for this kind of distraction, this inability to focus. It's called treif da'at, which means a torn mind. The 17th century commentator, Rabbi Isaiah Halevi Horowitz, often called the Shloah HaKodesh, however, finds a deeper meaning in these verses. He focuses on the refrain that the young conscript should go back to his home, which in Hebrew is yashov leveito. The Hebrew word for return is yashov, which shares a root with the Hebrew word teshuvah, which is often itself translated as return. Rabbi Horowitz teaches us that the true message of these verses is the not so subtle hint that now is the time for each and every one of us to return on finishing up what is critical in our lives, to engage in the tshuva of tidying up our metaphoric homes. Because as Rabbi Horowitz knows, we always read this Torah portion on the first Shabbat of the Hebrew month of Elul, the month that is the time for us to begin our spiritual preparation for the high holidays. In addition to Yashov Leveto, there's another linguistic clue in these phrases that the late Rabbi Alan Liu, in his book, This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared, points out. The repetition of the phrase, lest he die, which is repeated in each of the 3 verses I read above. Is there anyone who has built a new house but not yet dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, and another dedicate it. This phrase is significant because the high holidays, and especially Yom Kippur, are in many ways a dress rehearsal for death. We wear white on Yom Kippur to remind us of the shrouds we will be buried in. We abstain from life-giving forces such as eating and drinking. The liturgy starkly asks us, how many will pass away and how many will be born? Who will live and who will die? The images of God writing us in the book of life or death, of us begging for mercy and kindness, of gates closing, all these symbols ask us to flirt with death as a sort of shock therapy to remind us to more deeply engage in life. There are 2 things in life that we know for sure. We are all going to die, and none of us knows when. Beginning in Elul, we are challenged to confront our own mortality and to ask ourselves, what is it that I need to tend to before I die? Because unlike my somewhat frivolous opening questions to you, this isn't about summer running out of time. This is about life running out of time. So let me ask you a different set of questions now. What is your unfinished business? What are the loose ends in your life? What is your unharvested vineyard that is keeping you distracted and your mind torn? What is unsettled in your life? What decisions have you been putting off or avoiding? We have less than 3 weeks until Rosh Hashanah, and it's time to do the spiritual work we need to prepare to focus on tying up our loose ends of 5784. How? Let me offer you 3 suggestions. 1, focus on finishing your uncompleted tasks. What have you been procrastinating for too long? What is on your ever unfinished to-do list? Maybe it's the final stages of a project. Maybe it's a task you've been meaning to do for ages, such as finishing that will that's been sitting in your drawer for months, or maybe even longer, or visiting that doctor, or having that medical procedure that you've been avoiding. It might even just be reorganizing your Tupperware drawer. Just pick one project on your list, make a plan, and do it. 2, maybe it's time to recognize that you need to clear some things off your list to simplify your life. It's wonderful to have a full and vibrant life, but now is also the time to examine if you are stretched so thin that you are often distracted. There's actually research that shows that when we have too many unfinished tasks, our brains unintentionally focus on those, and that they can create a cognitive burden, and that we can become overwhelmed by them. It's even got a name. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. So maybe now is the time to undo your to-do list so that you can be more fully present for what and who in your life really matters: your friends, your family, and your community. Now is the time to practice saying no. 3, focus on your relationships, which might mean having difficult conversations that you've been avoiding because, well, it just feels too hard. Often, When I sit with bereaved families in the aftermath of the loss of their loved one, they talk about their regrets. They tell me about the conversations they wish they could have had but now cannot. They tell me about a complicated relationship that they wish they could have mended. They tell me about disputes that now don't seem so significant, ones they wish could have been better resolved. They tell me they regret not having said, "I love you," or not saying it enough. The lack of closure haunts them. So ask yourself, which relationships that I care about might be challenging in my life? And then reach out to those people to try to repair them before it's too late. It's hard, really hard, I know, because I've done it. I've had those hard conversations, and let me tell you something, sometimes something really amazing happens. Sometimes new understandings can emerge. Sometimes the sharing, the honesty, the vulnerability, the listening, the clearing up of misunderstandings is the exact catalyst that was needed not only to repair a relationship, but to deepen it. On Yom Kippur, we come before God to confess our sins, to ask for forgiveness, and to plead for another year of life. But we cannot stand before God until we've stood before our loved ones and before each other. Start now. Invite people for coffee. Invite them for a walk. Say the things that are on your mind. And ask them to tell you what's on their mind. And then listen. Really listen. Not defensively, openly, with curiosity. Make a list of all the things to tell the people in your life that you've been meaning to tell them, and do it. Reach out to tell the people in your life how much they mean to you and how much you love them. Even if you've said it before, say it again. I attended a benefit luncheon a few months ago, and one of the speakers hobbled up to the lectern on her crutches and very cutely opened with the remark, "You know, everyone says that there's that proverbial bus that might hit you one day. Well, guess what? I got hit by that bus." We all laughed, and I chuckled as well. But the point is actually very serious. We never know when that bus has our name on it. It's Elul. It's time for us all to return.